The great sound of London in England. In the reign of Charles II in 1669. But before I begin with my own fairly insignificant self, I wish to describe to you an event that happened only 3 years before I was born and set the course for many a person since then. And even when I was still young, I saw for myself the scars and ravages of the great fire of London. On a hot day in early September, hot and dry, it had been unusually so for London, a small bakery on a street that is charmingly called Pudding Street. These were in the wooden tenements, sort of small shops for the poor, down by the riverfront of the River Thames. A small fire started, not unusual in those days, not unusual in ours as well. It might have been put out quickly, but it spread fast within the bakery and began to threaten the surrounding wooden buildings. So the people, the volunteer firefighters, who are used enough to fire within London, quite properly went to the Mayor of London, Thomas Bloodworth, and asked his lordship to quickly come because the only true way to fight fire in London, even by the riverfront, for there was no particularly good way beyond bucket brigades that one could throw a great deal of water upon it, you demolished the buildings around it. It was too bad for the owners, but it did control fire relatively quickly. However, the only person who could give permission to demolish the buildings was the mayor. So his lordship came down. He looked at the fire, and he looked at the fire spreading. And he looked at the fire spreading. But he didn't want to take responsibility for demolishing the buildings, so you know what he said? No. He said, "Pish! Even a woman could piss on it and put it out." And away he went. And by the way, disappeared out of history because he rode straight out of London the next morning. Well, so the men were forced to attempt to use the buckets from the riverfront, but they could not stop this fire. So word came unto His Majesty, King Charles, who immediately gave permission to demolish buildings and stop the spread. But that was on Sunday evening. It had started just that morning, and it was already too late. So the next day, on Monday, the fire had run out of the wooden tenements of the poor, and it made its way to London's great financial district. Bankers' houses, the Royal Exchange, the newspaper, the largest one in England, and then a royal post office burned. So King Charles, who had left the city on the advice, and frankly was already forced to it, of his courtiers, asked his brother, James, the Duke of York, and the heir to the throne, to oversee the firefighting himself. James put to it with a good will, and his grace, along with his lifeguards, who were his bodyguards, rode up and down the streets, so overseeing the demolition of buildings, where bucket brigades could be arranged, he did so, and there were riots beginning in London because the rumors began to go around that it was foreigners who had started the fires. It was not, but foreigners. So native-born, frightened Londoners were attempting to find foreigners, drag them out, and beat them. But James, to his great credit, saved almost 50 of them that day and led them to safety. Nevertheless, the city burned. Now it had moved to the great shopping center of Cheapside. And from there, one of the greatest losses of all, to the great and beautiful edifice of St. Paul's Cathedral. This struck at the very heart, not only of government, but also of God. Then it dared to burn down one of the royal palaces. Well, that was enough for the king. Back he comes against his courtiers' wishes. He not only stays, but he helps his brother James on the bucket brigades. There is a baker, and here a peasant, and here a newspaper man, and here a banker, and here the Duke of York, and here the King of England, Scotland, and Ireland, holding the buckets. Well, with them there, James and Charles, they were able to demolish much faster because even the nobles couldn't say no to the king. They held the line. The fire still burned, but it was not spreading. This was Wednesday. But it was not until Sunday, a week from its beginning, that the blessed rain fell.